Thank you, guys. I now welcome the Mining and Energy Union, Northern Mining and New South Wales Energy District to give evidence today. I now welcome the Mining and Energy Union, Northern Mining and New South Wales Energy District to give evidence today. Excuse me, guys, can we just have a bit of respect for the witnesses that are here and have some quiet down the back? Excuse me, guys, if you're going to talk, can you please leave the room and have some respect for the witnesses at the front here? For the Hansard record, would you please state your name and capacity which you appear before the committee?
Robin Williams, and I'm the District President of the Mining and Energy Union, Northern Mining and New South Wales Energy District.
My name's Scott King. I'm an Assistant Power Plant Operator at Eraring Power Station and a Mining and Energy Union Delegate.
Thank you. This hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. Before I invite you to make a brief opening statement, let me proceed to discussions. Would you please state if you're a current or former member of a political party or a union or an investor in the renewable or nuclear industries, please?
Well, the last one I'm not, but the first two I'm an active member of the ALP and a member of the Mining and Energy Union.
Thank you very much.
I'm a member of the Mining and Energy Union.
Thank you. I now invite you to make a brief opening statement before we go to questions.
All right, well, I've already stated who I am. So our union covers more than 24,000 members nationally and 9,400 members in the district branch, working mostly in coal mining and coal-fired power generation. Our district covers workers at Eraring, Bayswater, Vales Point and Mount Piper Power Station. And nationally we cover power plant workers in the Latrobe Valley, Western Australia, Queensland. These are all the sites proposed by the Coalition for Nuclear Power. Our union has long advocated for coordination and support for energy workers and communities like ours, where power stations have been closing and will continue to do so. There's an urgent need for workforce support and investment in diversifying our regional economy, but we believe the Coalition's policy for nuclear energy is unrealistic and it won't come to fruition. The expert advice is that time has passed for Australia to create an economic viable nuclear industry in the time frame that we need. The majority of our coal-fired power workforce need jobs and power station closures in the next 10 years. After that, they will move to new areas and industries. None of our energy companies are interested in building nuclear power stations. We think it's a distraction from the work that needs to happen immediately to diversify our regional energy economies for the major changes ahead, and the prospects of future nuclear power plants could be a disincentive for future investments. The Coalition had 3 terms in office federally to develop a coherent energy policy which could have included nuclear, but they chose not to. They provide no support to displaced workers from the 5 coal power stations that have closed on their watch. They develop no plans to support workers from the 5 coal-fired power stations around Australia that will close in the next 5 years, and voted against the Net Zero Economy Authority established to provide support. Instead of real action, the Coalition has simply engaged in energy culture wars, and I believe that's what they are continuing to do now with their vague and unrealistic nuclear policy that does nothing to provide jobs in the time frame our energy workers need. I'm here today with Scott King, an operator from Eraring Power Station, who will also say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. King.
G'day, I'm Scott King. I'm an Assistant Power Plant Operator at Eraring Power Station and I'm a Mining and Energy Union Delegate. My workmates and I think that the current proposal to build a nuclear power plant on existing coal-fired power station sites is a poorly considered option for our future energy industry. Apart from the infrastructure and logistical challenges like sourcing cooling water and the transportation and storage of uranium to plants and removal of nuclear waste from this type of power station, the timelines for us just don't add up, especially when it comes to the workforce. The power station that I work at is closing in 2027. The projections show that most power stations have an accelerated pathway towards closure over the next 5 to 10 years. As our industry winds up, all of the advanced boiler and turbine experience in the workplace will disappear as people like me move into new jobs. You can't get that knowledge and experience back in 15 to 20 years' time. History shows that the government's proposal to build these plants will likely face massive financial and time-based blowouts. The New South Wales government has previously shown it has no appetite for continuing to own, operate and maintain power stations, let alone build a new one. This proposal means that we would potentially face a nuclear future with the most technologically advanced power generation system built for profit by the lowest bidder. I've talked about this with my workmates, about the continual cost-cutting in our industry and about our ongoing safety concerns. These concerns are a legitimate issue. What does our future look like with an inexperienced workforce operating and maintaining a nuclear plant to a cost, not to a standard? If any of the critical incidents that have occurred in coal-fired power stations over the years had occurred in a nuclear plant, the result would be catastrophic, not just for the people working at the station, but for the entire community surrounding them and possibly for the entire country. We're definitely concerned about moving into skilled jobs once the power station closes, and that's one of the reasons why I've been a strong advocate for the Net Zero Economy Authority. This is so we have a coordinated support network that backs us up as we move forward. Gambling with our future on a nuclear plan sounds nonsensical to me.
Thank you, Mr King. We'll start with you, Mr Kennedy.
Yeah, thank you. Mr Williams, late Jeff Dyke, first of all, for or against nuclear? You're against nuclear, is that what I take from your evidence? And apologies if I cut you off, the Chair's keeping us, we're short on time.
No, I wouldn't say I'm against nuclear, but what I'm against is the prospects of what you're proposing at this point in time.
So are you for lifting the nuclear prohibition in Australia?
No, I'm not for lifting the prohibition.
So how are you not against nuclear then?
My point would be that if there was a development of nuclear power stations, nuclear power, then our union has the ability to cover those workers, and at that point we'd do so.
But you're against lifting the nuclear prohibition?
At this point in time,
So
I am against lifting the nuclear prohibition,
Okay.
yes.
So, late Jeff Dyke, who was speaking on behalf of the MEU to a parliamentary inquiry in 2022, said, and I'll just quote you his opening statement, "We believe the only cost-effective and viable source of power would be nuclear. Australia has got large uranium reserves. We have an ideal waste storage environment in that we are geologically stable and dry, and there are plenty of remote areas. We have well-educated and skilled workers, stable government, good industry regulation, and probably more importantly, communities that need viable transitions. And that is a critical part of the social licence for establishing a nuclear industry. Fourth-generation nuclear power designs are much safer." He went on to say, "The ban on nuclear in Australia makes no logical sense. We regard it as emotive and it is out of step with other developed countries." So what's changed since 2022?
Jeff Dyke's no longer with us.
But he was speaking on behalf of your organisation. You said you have 24,000 members. He was representing a fair chunk of those. So what has changed in representing those members?
Jeff Dyke was speaking on behalf of the district that he represented, and that was obviously Jeff Dyke's view at that point in time.
So it
doesn't necessarily mean that it's the view of the union.
It's not true your 24,000 members hold the views you just articulated.
Some may well.
Some may not, though, as well.
Correct.
Okay, good. Good, we've got that established. In what industries do you think these 24,000 workers are going to transition to?
Well, our view is they probably wouldn't even be our members, but they would transition into infrastructure-type jobs. The Liddell battery, they could transition into those. There's no reason why they couldn't transition into removal of any other types of minerals that would be certainly used for manufacturing of renewable components.
So a study from the US Department of Energy and Employment has found 77% of workers in coal-fired power plants can seamlessly transition to nuclear. They're paid on average 14% more and 50% more than solar and wind. Which of your members would not want a pay rise to go into nuclear and would rather go into these other lower payer industries?
Well, our members won't have a nuclear industry to go to. My understanding is it'll take in excess of 15 years. We've got people who are losing their jobs 2027. Bayswater Power Station closes in 2033, if not before. And then we've got Mount Arthur Coal Mine closing in 2030. Them nuclear jobs, they're not there. There are no jobs.
Just to correct the record, we've heard evidence from sort of 10 to 20 years. It's probably been. We've had some say 8 and earlier, but I think most of the evidence has been 10 to 20 years in that range, and most actually 10 to 15, at least that I've heard. So that puts you in mid-2030s. Eraring, where you are, sir, has been extended. If there was an opportunity to extend the local coal power fire station here a couple of years to allow for a transition to nuclear, would you be supportive of that?
We would be supportive of extending coal for as long as we need coal to give us baseload and reliable power.
And does that include to transition to nuclear? So these 77% of workers can transition to higher paying jobs?
I'm not sure that the timeframe will line up. That's my concern.
But if you could get assurance on that, would you be supportive of it?
If you could get an absolute assurance, then you'd certainly have to consider that.
Good. And I appreciate that answer, because I think that's exactly what the Coalition wants to do. If the Coalition is successful in the next election, what they propose is a 2.5-year consultation period where there's independent experts who would consult with your members, who would consult with the community, who would consult with the workforce, independent of the Liberal Party, independent of government. Very different to what we've heard from previous evidence today about the intermittent power consultation. And then, so doesn't that sound like a good process to engage your members, to engage your workforce, to see if there's an opportunity to actually transition them to higher paying jobs?
Well, I'm not an expert in timeframes, but the information that I've read suggests that it's more like 15 years. Appreciate you're going to take the 10-year approach because that suits your argument. You know, I'm a bit of a realist and I think it would be more than 10 years. I think it's more like 15 years. And the concern that our union has got is there is no viable transition from what we're doing today currently into what the Coalition's proposing for the future.
Thank you. I'm right for now, Chair. I might circle back at the end.
Thank you, Mr Kennedy. We'll go to Dr Ryan for, next.
Thank you. I'm wondering. Actually, no. I'm going to pass you. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. We'll go to Mr Burnell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for providing evidence today. I want to pick up from where Mr Kennedy was just asking some questions before about workforce and timelines. Now, some of my concern would go to the fact that if, best case scenario, Mr Kennedy might be right. There's not a lot of detail in the current 6-page policy document, but say they land it, all well and good. If they don't, what's the impact to the local community, to the workforces, if this false hope is provided and we don't land power generation from nuclear facilities inside of 10 to 12 years and it blows out to 15, 20 years? What will that do to the local communities, local workforces? What does that mean for your family, Scott? I'm keen to get some of your thoughts, mate.
It's a difficult thing to look at. In terms of our power station, we've got about 200 full-time employees. There's about another 200 to 250 full-time contractors that work there. The ripple effect when our power station closes is there'll be 1,000 jobs lost in our community. To hang your hat on the hope of something that might happen in 15 years' time, when we're closing in 2, potentially 3 or 4, there's a long time in the middle, and it doesn't matter how you fudge those figures. It's a long time. Where those people go and what they do in the way of employment and how it impacts their households, their family and community, that's a pretty grey area to look at and say, well, you know, we'll just hold our breath and hope. Fingers crossed everything's going to be good in a decade or more.
Okay. The other part of that is extending the life of these coal-fired power stations. But how intensive are maintenance cycles going to become? As you know, if we, from hearing what Mr Kennedy just said, that's the LNP's plan, is that they're going to try and extend the life of these coal-fired power stations until they can bring nuclear power on. But is there concerns around potential reliability issues once we push out past, say, 2030, pushing towards 2040? Is it likely that we would expect more intermittent shutdowns, etc., that aren't scheduled?
I think as far as maintenance schedules are concerned for coal-fired power stations, our power station, for example, has a pretty stringent regime of how they do long-term strategies for major outages. Like any business that runs a generator like that, you're going to have times where you have forced outages, but our long-term strategies are in place years and years in advance. There are power stations that have run a lot longer than we have. All it would be is simply a case of extending the current strategies out to a future point.
If I can go to the two questions you raised. To be brutally frank, if we don't have a smooth transition from one to the other, regardless of what that is, then these communities will be decimated. You know, if people think that there's going to be this club here and there's going to be the local butcher shop and someone's selling coffee, those shops will all close. But it has ramifications, you know, that flow downhill. People that own houses in these local communities have got a value on their house today. That won't be the value that those people have on their houses tomorrow, or in fact any of the land. So unless we've got a smooth transition to keep people in these areas, and a smooth transition means we need to be training people. We can't have a process where we just go, well, okay, we might have something at this point in time and we might need to train them up. Well, you need to train people up for what you've got for them to go to in the future. So obviously training would be fairly important, and that's why it needs to be seamless. When you're talking about sweating the assets, now Scott does work for a company. I know he works at Araring, but I attended a conference we had 2 years ago, and we had delegates from Queensland, Victoria, WA, as well as here in New South Wales. And a number of those delegates raised concerns with us directly, the leadership of the union, that those companies will sweat their assets. They're already doing it. There was an example given from one of the power stations in Victoria where a large piece of equipment suspended from the roof, because that's how power stations are made up, had not been inspected, effectively fell down, crushed, smashed through a walkway. It would have crushed an individual had that individual been working there. And I've dealt with a lot of coal companies in particular and some energy companies in my time as a union official, and I guarantee you these companies, they won't spend 1 cent that they don't have to. And if the government, any government of the day, thinks that they can extend the life of a power station with a private enterprise and it's not going to cost a lot of money, then they're sadly mistaken, because these coal companies will hold you to ransom, and we've experienced a little bit of that out of Araring in relation to coal contracts with the Centennial Group. So you probably won't hear me say too many nice things about some of these types of people that we're dealing with.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Mr. Burnell. Dr. Molino.
Oh, thanks, Chair. So I just wanted to explore one of the risk areas that has been raised in these hearings today, and that is the construction time. There are aspirations to get plants underway in the mid-2030s, but when we look at comparable economies like the UK and the US, there are prominent examples of plants where construction times blew out. So Vogel in Georgia, for example, I think it was expected to take 7 or 8 years and took 15, and similarly in the UK, Hinkley's been extended a number of times. Just interested in your thoughts on what some of it would be if construction time actually did blow out in practice, as has occurred in those countries.
Well, from my perspective, I'm not sure that I ever hear of too many projects, whether it's from building a residential property to building a bridge or a roadway. Every project blows out. They just all blow out. And unfortunately, I guess, and a number of people within the community will probably resonate with this comment, every time it's a government who is building a project, they inevitably blow out. They've got to reforecast the costs, they've got to do all sorts of stuff, because there seems to be a bit of a perception that if it's a government-funded project, that we can probably bill them the top dollar. So, you know, I would think that these projects would blow out, the costs would be much worse. Again, I'm not an expert in this area, I only read the material that's available, but, you know, I think you'd have to be a pretty brave person to suggest that any building of any project's not going to blow out. And the bigger the project, the bigger the cost and the longer the lead time. So I think that would be a fair comment.
And it would also have consequences for worker transition, presumably.
Oh, absolutely. Again, it's the point that I raised a little earlier. We need a process where we've got more of a seamless transition from one to another. We need to have pretty close timeframes, because we need to make sure that we can train people up so that they can transition into new industries. You know, you look at the coal industry, we've got a lot of tradespeople. The energy division, we've got a lot of tradespeople. Those people are probably easier, especially if you're talking about electricians, to train them up for new industries, and fitter and turners, mechanics, those types of people likewise a bit easier. But when you're talking about the coal industry, in largely the operational type activities is 80% of the workforce, then there's a fair bit more training that would need to be applied to those people to give them the ability to transition into some of those other areas.
And just on another risk around water, what are some of the risks you see around not just accessing water, but for example, storing and discharging contaminated water, radioactive water, after it's been used for cooling?
I think to look at a site like Liddell, it's an interesting dilemma whether it's going to be a closed loop cycle or whether it's a once through process. Each of those processes will use a significantly different amount of water. In the event that you do have some sort of critical incident, how that waterway is impacted, that remains to be seen. I'd have to leave that to the experts.
But it could take. It's another example of an issue that would take a lot of working through, very site-specific issues to deal with, either storage or discharge.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're a country that goes through some pretty horrific droughts, get to a point where we've got no water, I don't know how you're going to keep them cool.
Look, I'm aware of Lake Liddell. I'm not sure exactly how much water's in Lake Liddell. I wouldn't have the expertise to be able to make a comment with respect to whether that body of water could cope with it in any way, shape or form, to be honest.
Okay, that's all from me.
Thank you, Dr. Molina. Do you want to go again, Mr. Kennedy?
Yeah, we were just talking about the Labor Party's adopted the AEMO ISP as its policy, the step change scenario. So it's a policy that lays out when they see different energy sources coming on. As part of that, they're retiring coal-fired power plants before the end of their useful economic life by use of a shadow carbon price, so earlier than what the retailers would actually close them. Are you supportive of that?
Well, what I said a little earlier, I'm supportive of keeping power stations running so that we can make sure that we have enough power in the system. And I think that there's probably a good example in relation to Eraring. We're certainly supporters of Eraring continue to operate for those reasons. Now, I appreciate AEMO and others do modelling and they can tell us what they tell us, but you'd have to be realistic with respect to if at some point you get to a stage where you don't think there's enough power, then you should keep the power stations online, in my view.
Yeah, so I don't want to verbal you, but you have concerns about the current plan. Is that? I'm honestly not trying to verbal you here. Tell me if that's a fair.
No, I don't have concerns about the current plan, but what I don't know is when you get to that point in time, if there's a requirement to keep a power station going, then you should.
So no concerns. You're supportive of early retirement of coal before its economic life, then? That's what's in the current plan.
Only if we've got enough power in this.
Okay. Supportive early retirement. Okay. And look, I honestly don't mean to cause any offence about this, but the about-face change in some of MEU's policy, and that quote that I just read, where how definitive that was on, we believe it's the only clean power source that Australia should be using, nuclear. And now saying, no, we're for the current plan, we're against lifting the moratorium. Has there been conversations with the ALP since they've announced this policy about the MEU's previous stance and previous public comments?
You're referring to Jeff Dyke's comments? Yeah. Well, Jeff Dyke's comments are Jeff Dyke's comments. That doesn't mean that they were reflective of the leadership of our union.
Well, he made them to a parliamentary inquiry under parliamentary oath, and as you said, you've got 24,000 members. I assume he represented a fair proportion of those, I'm sure. Victoria, okay. And now Victoria's changed its stance. So just ask the question again, was there conversations with the Australian Labor Party and the MEU about those comments and about your current policy?
Not with me.
No, are you aware of any other conversations or comments about that?
No, I'm not.
You're not? Okay. We also talked about water. Are you aware of a Harvard 2017 study that says a standard nuclear power facility uses about the same amount of water as a coal-fired power station plant, and would that alleviate some of your concerns?
I'm not aware of the document you refer to.
Yes.
But I did Google it, and it did suggest that it could potentially be roughly the same with respect to water.
Yeah. And the previous panel, we just heard some evidence that I wasn't aware of, where they grazing livestock, they have to fill out a form and say their livestock don't have access to paddocks that may have wind turbine or solar runoff. When you're worried about water, do your concerns also relate to, well, if these livestock can't have access to paddocks that may have had wind or solar runoff, do you worry about that with the water supply as well, or not? And if not, why not?
It was the question about water was a question raised with us. We didn't raise that.
I'm raising the question
We don't
now.
know.
Are you worried about water with what we just heard in that last testimony about it pollutes livestock? Livestock can't be in paddocks around that. Do you worry about that as a concern?
So livestock can't be around paddocks that have got a wind turbine, is that what you
Yeah, so the exact, I can read it for you if you like. I read it out to the
Please
last.
table that, Mr Kennedy.
Yeah, absolutely.
That information.
Absolutely. It's just a screenshot from the LPA accreditation site. Food and safety on your property. Do livestock have access to leaking electrical transformers, capacity hydraulic equipment, solar panels, wind turbines, coal seam gas structures, or coal mine structures? So I guess in this case it's about solar panels and wind turbines, and the farmers have to answer yes or no. And then if they answer yes, it can impact their ability to have livestock even in that area. Or if they'll have those concerns around livestock, are there also similar concerns you have around water?
I'm not an expert in the area. I don't really know. All I know is the fact that you need water for a power station, you need water for a nuclear power station. That's the detail I have. I have no knowledge of whether livestock will be impacted by renewables you refer to. I have no knowledge of that at all.
Yep. Okay. No further questions. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Kennedy. Thank you for coming in, guys. It's a pleasure having you here. Do you know of anybody that has any of the power stations that have been approached and asked to close down early from the Labor Party, from the current government?
None. It's not been raised with me, so none that I'm aware of.
And are you aware that the power stations have chose their own dates to close down by their economic benefits to what they're getting out of it and that sort of stuff? Do you think they're making that choice themselves, or is government pushing into that choice?
They're private enterprise. They're making the decision themselves. And if we didn't have a situation where they had to give the notice that they do today, then they'd be no different to any other business. They'd give our members a month's notice and say that there's no more work.
Yeah. How much notice does a power station have to give members and workers of the power station notice that they will be coming to the end of life at some stage?
Well, I understand they've got to notify the regulator. I'm pretty sure it's 5 years. But not necessarily that would apply to a worker. That's the closure of a power station. You know, if a power station wanted to restructure their employees, they can give much less notice. It can be the term as stated in the employment contract, which could be
going through that now. We've got people at our power station that have been given 4 weeks' notice to leave.
Yep.
Guys that have been there for 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Because as we get closer and closer towards our end date, the company is looking to thin everything down as much as they possibly can.
Yep, thank you, Mr King. I've just got the policy booklet from the opposition here. It's a 5-page document with a front cover on it. And in it says, a federal coalition government will initially develop 2 establishment projects using either a small modular reactors or modern large plants such as AP1000 or APR 1400. They will start producing electricity by 2035 with the small modular reactors, or 2037 if modern larger plants are found to be the best option. Do you know whether they've spoken to any of the people around these 7 sites, the workforces, the unions, or any of the local government areas, about whether which will be the two first sites that get done first? Do you know whether they've spoken to AGL and Liddell, whether we're going to be one of the first sites?
I certainly have no knowledge of any information being provided to AGL or Origin or anybody. I'm not aware of that. I just find it a bit funny. Again, I'm not an expert, but small modular reactors, my understanding is that they're not commercially available at this stage.
That's right, they're not currently at this stage, yes. Have they reached out to any of the unions or your union and spoke to you about this, about whether Liddell will be the first one or whether it will be one of the last ones that get completed?
We've not been contacted at all, so we have no knowledge about where the first reactor would be built.
No worries, thank you. And do you think it's disingenuous of the coalition to come out with a false hope for workforce? This is more directed at you, Mr King, because you work in this workforce. You're directly affected by this, and saying that they can have a nuclear power station working by 2037 in this country, when we've heard from experts that are telling us that it's going to take 8 to 10 years just at the regulatory framework, that we've heard from other people around the world that on average it's taken 17 to 23 years to build a nuclear power station. Do you think that's fair on your workmates and yourself?
No, I don't. To go through the process that we've been through for the last couple of years, where, I mean, originally we were told that we were a power station that was going to be open until 2032. We had our lifeblood ripped out from underneath us when Origin came out and said we're closing in 2025. They've spent the last 18 months in cahoots with the government to try and get themselves a better deal so that they'd stay open for another 2 years, potentially 4 years if the market's in a good position for them. They're using the workers in the power station, and all power stations will fall to the same point, where we'll get used as pawns in a political game to try and keep all of this open. Now, if we're going to run everything on the false hope of a nuclear energy industry that could be here in 10 to 15 years' time, you're talking about going through a couple of years' worth of community consultation and then all of the BS that will sit with, you know, regulatory compliance before we actually start construction. Then we're likely to see a cost and a time blowout. All of the people in our industry who hold all of the experience that will be required to run these power stations, they won't be there anymore. They'll have left. You can't turn on a nuclear reactor and have Joe Bloggs from, you know, Retrovision down the road pick up a 5-week course, or ask people to leave their jobs pulling cafe lattes in the local cafe and say, come and learn how to drive a nuclear power plant in the next 3 or 4 weeks and jump in and have a go. It's not as simple as that. You know, even to be an operator in a coal-fired power station takes a minimum of 5 years' experience before you've cut your teeth to a point where you're considered competent at your job. To turn around and say those people will walk away from that industry for 10 to 15 years and then just up stumps and come back from wherever they are in the country and take up roles again, that's farcical. It really is.
Would you like to add anything to that, Mr Williams?
I guess from my concern, it's really disappointing that people want to play political games with people's lives. You know, we're a mining and energy union. It would have been really simple for our division to stand up in front of our members. Obviously those members live in the communities and they go back to their homes overnight, and just simply say to them, oh look, the mining and energy union is going to continue to bang the drum for a coal-fired power station or a coal-fired power station with carbon capture and storage. We were hopeful that that might be, I guess, the silver bullet for us. But in the end, when we realised that, you know, everything was being driven away from coal-fired power, we stood up in front of our members and said, well look, we're not going to stand here and bullshit to you and tell you that we're going to agitate for a power station and take the populist approach, because that would have been okay for at the time. You might have got elected at the next election. But what we did is stood up in front of our members and said, look, we've got a real problem confronting us, so we need to, I guess, take the challenge head on, and we need to start to agitate for protection of our members so that they can transition into other jobs into the future. Does the mining and energy like talking about some of this stuff? Well, the answer is no. But reality would suggest that that's where the world's heading, that's where Australia's heading. So we took an approach that we spoke to our members, and I can tell you, when I address delegates, and I'm doing a delegates meeting on Friday, and there's probably people around this room that have seen those meetings, those delegates aren't backward in coming forward. And when you're standing in front of them telling them that, oh look, you know, coal-fired power stations are in a bit of trouble, and by the way, the mines that feed them, you're in a fair bit of trouble as well, and I'm standing in front of them telling them that we've got to agitate for some sort of process for a just transition. That's not easy, but we don't take any backward step on that. We think that that was the right thing to do for our members, to protect as much employment for them as we can, but more importantly, protect the communities. Because without some form of employment for these people to transition into, it's the point that was raised a little earlier, we will have none of these towns. You know, you look at them, Merriwar, Denman, Muswellbrook, Scone, Singleton, Branxton, you can start to name them. These places will all be desolate. There'll be no people here. Okay, there'll be a few farmers around. They might have some dramas in some other areas, but they'll have no infrastructure. That'll all be gone. I just don't think that people truly understand the gravity of some of the things that are being dealt with at a government level with this false hope that, oh, by the way, we can have this great nuclear power station for you in this period of time. It just doesn't stack up from my perspective. I suspect it's in excess of 15 years. I expect there'll be blowouts. It's probably more like 20 years. You line that up with the time frame of the closures of power stations and mines in this area, and I think that pretty disingenuous to the people that live in these areas.
Thank you. Can I just ask one more question, and we'll go to Matt Bennell just for a quick follow-up question. We live in a unique area here in the Hunter. It's a beautiful place, an amazing place. We have a lot of coal mines. We've been powering New South Wales and Australia for the last century, and we will for centuries to come. It just may look a little bit different. However it looks in the landscape, whichever way it ends up going right. How long, for a coal mine, how long does it take for an extension to be granted on a coal mine site that's already mining currently? How long does that average period take? Because this is one thing that hasn't been spoken about really at all in this committee, is how long the approvals procedure takes just to get a coal mine that we already have in this area. We have lots of them. What the difference would be looking at possibly getting a nuclear power station.
Well, extensions to coal mines, existing coal mines today, are a problem. In fact, I've been talking to Glencore in relation to Hunter Valley. Hunter Valley put forward a proposal that extended the mine out to 2048. They've now had to revise that proposal and bring it back to a short period of time, which is about another 2 years, 2.5 years. And in fact, they've got to go back and then put forward another application to do an extension beyond that. These extensions take years. You know, you can
some of the people I've been talking with around the mining industry, it can take them anywhere from 4 to 8 years just to get an extension granted.
Yeah, that would be right.
Yeah.
They take years. It just beggars belief when you consider the mine's already operational. They've already got a lease, but they don't have approval, and we're only talking about approval to continue into land they already own. It just seems extraordinary from my perspective.
That's right, and I don't see how that's been taken into account with the opposition's policy document that they've got in here, because they got nothing about that.
Well, if the same process applies to a nuclear power plant, then again, you know, I suspect I probably won't see it in my lifetime. I'm not sure. I've got 20 years to go, so I'm not sure I'll see nuclear power.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Bennell.
I won't ask you to clarify your age, Mr. Williams. I want to go back to your opening statement. So, just correct me if I'm wrong. Did you say 9,400 members that you represent in the district here?
Correct.
Right. I assume that you would probably be one of the largest peak representative bodies in the region then for workforces. Would that be a fair assumption?
Yeah, and to back that up, in fact, we're one of the affiliates with Hunter Workers, and so Hunter Workers has 25 unions as affiliates, and they're generally based out of Newcastle, and I am aware that we are the largest affiliate with Hunter Workers.
So you're the largest affiliate. So the coalition made the announcement back, I think it was the 19th of June this year, regarding the nuclear pathway that they've put forward in this policy document. I would have thought, as the peak employee representative body in the area, that you would have had some direct conversations with the Leader of the Opposition, the Shadow Energy Minister, regarding this plan and what potentially happens to the workforce that you represent. So you're telling me that they have not engaged with the Mining Energy Union, the Northern Mining and New South Wales Energy District, at all since their announcement?
They have not engaged.
Nearly 7 months ago since the announcement, and they have not picked up the phone and spoken to you.
No, they've not picked up a phone and spoken to us. And more importantly, we talk about northern mining, so we're northern mining, but our district covers New South Wales Energy. So we cover all the power stations within New South Wales as well, and I've spoken to nobody.
They've not picked the phone up to have a conversation to at least start off on the right footing with your membership, employees at all the coal-fired power stations, the coal mines, etc. They've just chosen not to engage and consult.
There's been no engagement with us at all, no consultation, no, nothing.
I find that mind-blowing. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Bennell. Unfortunately, we've run out of time today, guys. Thank you for appearing. If you've been asked to provide any additional information, including questions on notice, please forward it to the Secretariat by Friday the 10th of January 2025. Please note that responses to questions on notice will be published on the website as submissions to the inquiry. You will be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence to assist you with answering questions taken on notice today, and you'll have the opportunity to request corrections to transcription errors. Thank you, guys, for appearing. Cheers.